Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda.
Hare Krishna. Welcome to our channel Bhagavad-gita. Here it is, because here we find Bhagavad-gita as it is. My name is Latika Dasi, and this book is, of course, Bhagavad-gita really doesn't need a presentation because it's a very famous book. But our edition is translated and commented by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, and we are in the third chapter, Karma Yoga. So we are reading text 38. Duhume navriyate vahnir yatha darsho malena cha yatholbe navrito garbhas tatha tene damavritam. As fire is covered by smoke, as a mirror is covered by dust, or as the embryo is covered by the womb, the living entity is similarly covered by different degrees of this lust. So this refers back to the previous verse where Arjuna is asking, by what is one impelled to sinful acts even unwillingly, as if engaged by a force? And Krishna is explaining it is lust only. So this is a slightly unfamiliar concept, because when we think of lust, we tend to think of it as something that happens in the sexual field, and it's not so, most people in general are not so driven by it in their daily life. But lust, kama, it refers to desires, brought on by the senses. And we will hear more about it. I just wanted to make a little comment that we shouldn't take the terminology to be something very unusual, because Bhagavad-gita is being very scientific. We are here in this material world. We are actually spiritual to our nature. What keeps us here? What motivates us? And we come down to this concept of kama, of lust. And if we hear the Bhagavad-gita, then it may give us a little broader understanding, and also an understanding that we can apply practically when we are practicing our spiritual life. Purport. There are 3 degrees of covering of the living entity by which his pure consciousness is obscured. This covering is but lust under different manifestations, like smoke in the fire, dust on the mirror, and the womb about the embryo. When lust is compared to smoke, it is understood that the fire of the living spark can be a little perceived. In other words, when the living entity exhibits his Krishna consciousness slightly, he may be likened to the fire covered by smoke. Although fire is necessary when there is smoke, there is no overt manifestation of fire in the early stage. This stage is like the beginning of Krishna consciousness. The dust on the mirror refers to a cleansing process of the mirror of the mind by so many spiritual methods. The best process is to chant the holy names of the Lord. The embryo covered by the womb is an analogy illustrating a helpless position, for the child in the womb is so helpless that he cannot even move. This stage of living condition can be compared to that of a tree. The trees are also living entities. But they have been put in such a condition of life by such a great exhibition of lust that they are almost void of all consciousness. The covered mirror is compared to the birds and beasts, and the smoke-covered fire is compared to the human being. In the form of a human being, the living entity may revive a little Krishna consciousness, and if he makes further development, the fire of spiritual life can be kindled in the human form of life. By careful handling of the smoke in the fire, fire can be made to blaze. Therefore, the human form of life is a chance for the living entity to escape the entanglement of material existence. In the human form of life, one can conquer the enemy, lust, by cultivation of Krishna consciousness under able guidance. So, as we may notice in the verse and also in the purport, we don't talk about lust as much as how it covers the living entity, because the central point is not this material condition. The central point is the fact that it covers us as living being. It covers our original consciousness. Still, the consciousness is there, but it is obscured and it is misdirected. So we see human beings, consciousness is obvious. Each person we meet, they are an individual, they are different, they have their priorities, they have their drive, they have their desires. But when this desire is changed in contact with material energy, it is called lust. In the original stage, when the living entity is not obscured by this whole material illusion that we are inside of, when we are in our original position in the spiritual world, there are also desires, but those desires are of the same spiritual nature, actually in connection with who we are and the soul. So that is actually an important thing when we come to spiritual life. Spiritual life is not all about putting down desires. It is very important that we understand this about our own nature, because if we are just going on in an artificial way to repress desires and to consider all the lust is bad, like some spiritual schools have it, we're all going to be one and we're all going to merge into a oneness that is void of everything that's material. And then in everything that's material is everything we see: form, personality, desires. Then Prabhupada has mentioned that in another comment. This kind of philosophy actually increases materialism, because an ordinary person takes a look at that philosophy and says, okay, I'm not going to be a person, I'm not going to have desires and relationships and enjoyment. I'd rather stay in the material world. At least I have something here. So we have something here, but what we have here is what we really are, but covered by the material identification, the material body, the false ego, the ahankara, and here we speak about lust. So when that lust covers us a lot, then we become totally unable to see our pure spiritual nature. But as human beings, maybe we don't think about trees as being very lusty, but lust has that effect also, that it covers our original intelligence, it covers our original vision. And we have that in some countries. When a crime is committed under strong emotional affect, then that carries a lighter sentence, a lighter punishment, because it is understood that the intelligence goes away. Of course, we can discuss that, but it is what happens. It is what happens. When we have a strong desire, then our intelligence goes along with that desire. Our intelligence doesn't put up a logical list of things why my desire is wrong. My intelligence goes straight into helping me fulfill my desire. So when our desire is to be separate from Krishna, to be separate and joyous in this world, then our intelligence will help us. So our intelligence will also be covered, and that's the effect. The point is not that we're in a material body that is made of dull material senses, and therefore we can't think properly. It's kind of like the other way around. We have separate desires from Krishna, and therefore Krishna allows us to be covered by this body that kind of meets up with those inclinations that we already have. And therefore, when we want to do something about that, then we have to understand the mechanism of these things. So a human being, fire covered by smoke, there's still a lot of fire going on. And as a human being, we have a lot of consciousness, a lot of ability, a lot of individuality and strength. But if we don't make a conscious effort, we will naturally be drawn here and there by the impulses of our senses to different degrees depending on our nature. An animal is more covered. We still see them as persons. I don't personally have any pets in my house or any household animals in my daily work. But you see that. If somebody has their own dog or their own horse, or we have cows where I live, and they are individuals. They have personalities. You know, one of our little cows is more impatient. If there's not enough grass uh, in the spot, she will find a way to sneak out and go elsewhere. And somebody else is more patient and they are not so driven, and they know exactly who is going to feed them. If they turn up, they will also move quickly in that direction. But if somebody else turns up carrying a bag, then they think usually when they carry bags they have something for us, and then they follow that person around. So there's obviously consciousness, desire, individuality and so on, but it's more covered than human beings, and there is not the same facility for spiritual realization. And our plants and our trees, they are even duller. They just kind of look like matter, but not really, because they grow and they reach out. We know that if you have a tree growing close to your house, you have to be a little bit careful, because the roots will seek out the water, and maybe those roots will harm the foundation of the building. And the branches will seek out the sunshine, and they will not grow into a wall, because they have some sense of what is there, but that consciousness is very, very covered. So in the same way, if we stick to that material identification of our body, and we form our life in such a way that we are just taking care of our senses, thinking that this is the highest level of free will. This is me as a person. I'm a person who likes to eat potatoes. And I'm not like this other person who likes to eat carrots. We are very different. We are very individual. No, those tastes, they are just based on our body. But here it is described, which the Bhagavad-gita is all about. It's not just a description of how the material world is complicated. Those descriptions are there so that we will have the right tools, so that we can make the right strategies in this life. No, what is actually described is not just the covering, but what it is covering. It is covering us, the eternal spirit soul, who has an eternal relationship to Krishna. And therefore, Prabhupada comes in here with different descriptions. How, yes, the embryo in the womb is totally helpless. An animal is less helpless. They have some ability to move. And the smoke on the mirror is used in another example, where we hear of the holy name and how our heart is covered by dust, but the cleansing process of chanting the holy name clears it all up. And if we see that the fire, which is the living entity, the consciousness of the living entity, if we feed that in a spiritual sense, just like here in Sweden, we don't always make fires. Maybe, I have a neighbor, she always makes a fire, but in general, fire is something, for making it a little cozy in the winter, or for maybe having a nice evening in the summer. You put some fire there and it makes it nice. But in India, you always make fires. There are fires all over the place. And we were sitting listening to some lectures, and it was outdoors, and the evening was coming, and the mosquitoes were coming. And then this lady started to make a fire out of cow dung. And at first it was basically just smoke, but she knew what she was doing. She was handling this cow dung, and she was fanning it a little bit, and from that smoke the fire was coming up. And then of course she put some special incense on it, and then we had smoke again, but a different smoke. And this smoke, the mosquitoes didn't like it. It repelled them, so we could sit there peacefully and hear. But we could see that the first process, you have a little bit of a flame, and then you fan it, and then the fire becomes brighter. And in the same way with our spiritual consciousness, once we notice it, then we can fan it by applying the proper spiritual oxygen, the proper nourishment for the fire to grow, and avoiding pouring water on it or other, when you burn something in the fire, if you have nice dry wood, the fire will blaze. And if your wood is soggy and wet and not properly dried, it may also work for a fire, but it will create a lot of smoke. So therefore, when we know about our firewood, we take care to have the proper nice dried wood. And when we know about spiritual life, we take care to live a pure life and not unnecessarily feed that lust that we have now decided and understood to be an impediment, and we are also understanding it better and better by these verses. So this is a practical verse. It's a little poetic, and the concept of lust is maybe not something we think or talk about, but it's one of those obstacles that comes up in spiritual life, and we are not helped by kind of ignoring it or avoiding it. Or I think Bhagavad-gita is like that a lot. I want to speak about Krishna consciousness, I want to speak about the nice things, and then when you get into these kind of nitty-gritty practical steps, then I can't avoid it because it's in the Bhagavad-gita, and this is very healthy because then I can use this properly in spiritual life, which is something I want to do in this lifetime, and I can also speak about it here, so we all get to understand the practice of Krishna consciousness in a very practical way. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Thank you for watching. We aim for updates every Tuesday and Friday. Please come back. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them down there. We also have some links and information for you. And there is, of course, the subscribe button. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
I'm a Hare Krishna, and I approve this message. Subscribe.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna.